I just recorded a video essentially comparing Metal Gear Solid to The Last of Us and claiming that Konami got it right in the 90s, where PlayStation fails to get it right now with all of their studios, all their different franchises. And I stand by that. But what I did was not what I was intending to do, because I was actually going to talk about Hollywood movies, right? Instead, like I kind of got off track and got like started talking about like other games, but like, let's be real here for a second. Like Metal Gear Solid is 100% better than most Hollywood productions. I don't want to say like all of them, because of course I haven't seen everything, but I've seen enough of like generic action schlock and like the inspiration for this, like Escape from New York, and like, I've seen enough like, movies like The Terminator and like The Matrix and stuff like that to tell you pretty conclusively that Metal Gear Solid is better than all of that. Metal Gear, like gaming surpassed Hollywood in like the 90s, and we're still in this weird phase where they don't want to admit it. It's kind of like how like Nintendo was winning the console war, but nobody, especially PC gamers, wants to admit it, right? Like it's a lot like that. Like gaming is bigger than Hollywood, bigger than film, bigger than TV, bigger than like Netflix, bigger than like all of that, like streaming, like all of that stuff. Like gaming is bigger than all of it, but nobody wants to admit it. They're in this like weird denial phase where like they try and like write off like these major properties like Final Fantasy VII as like just kid stuff, right? And it's embarrassing to see the links that people go to like pretend that Pokemon isn't popular, or that like the Mario movie wasn't successful or whatever, that like kids don't like The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, right? Like there's this weird like denial about like what's doing well and what's not. I think like Five Nights at Freddy has done like fairly well for itself, like in spite of critics coming after it, like probably purely because it's a video game movie, and also because of political reasons. But like I do think like the core of it, and like Roger Ebert talked about this a lot, right? That fat fucking retard, right? Like, oh, video games, they're a menace to society. They'll never be art. They'll never be better than film. Like, fucking retard. They were bigger than film when you were they were bigger than film when Siskel was still alive. Okay? Like film has been a declining medium for like decades now, because of how like politically because of how much of it is propaganda, and how like there's no real talent. All the actors are dreadful. They basically just play themselves. The script writers are garbage. Like I am living in the middle of nowhere, and I'm putting out better scripts than like these like these nobodies in Hollywood who get like paid millions of dollars a year to write scripts that like don't actually get produced into films, right? Like the difference in like between gaming culture, in which I get like dozens of great games a year, versus like movie culture, where like we haven't gotten anything legitimately good since like the 80s, right? It's like startling to me, right? Like people don't want to admit that film is an inferior art form to gaming, because film is like the medium that they became successful in. It's the one that like they grew up with, the one they've always succeeded in, the one they've like that has traditionally been the one to like control the masses, right? The plebs art form, right? Film, right? They are losing out to video games in that regard. Like film has been replaced by video games as like the most basic, easily accessible entertainment there is, right? Like games are bigger than film, and the spurgs, in Hollywood, the critics, like the analysts, the journalists, the filmmakers are like really don't want to admit it. They are doing everything they possibly can to try and keep up this facade that like gaming can't keep up, or that like people don't take it seriously. But in reality, people like me exist. People everywhere take gaming very seriously, and the whole narrative that like like you're essentially just trying to gatekeep, people from like establishing like real video games as like legit competitors to film in this regard. All right, like they don't want to make a fair comparison. They don't want to compare like products. They don't want to compare like what games can do versus what film can do. Like it's just a unilateral, like just oh, film is superior to games. They gamers will never appreciate like fine film like we do, like cuties or whatever they watch, like yeah, whatever those people like enjoy watching. Like the reality is, gaming has been better than film for a long time. And I think the games that really kicked that off are Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid, both of which really emphasize how an interactive interface can really change a a plot. Metal Gear Solid is very, very much like inspired by like action movies of the 80s and like really takes a lot of inspiration from that. And it's very similar in a lot of ways. But at the same time, it's very video gamey, right? It really embraces the nature of the video game with like boss fights and like the ability to stop wherever you are and like do codec conversations and like learn more about the world and like the setting if you want to, at your own pace. Like it really makes you feel involved and invested in the plot on a scale and a level that will never be possible in any film ever, right? Like it's incredible at what Konami was able to accomplish with Metal Gear Solid back in 98. And in a lot of ways, a lot of ways, a lot of fall a lot of games that have like come out since then have done more than that. Metal Gear Solid 2, a lot of people don't talk about this, actually predicted how the internet and like how they will control the public's actually how they control the public's opinions on current events. Like I, we what is the quote? Like we create context to these situations. Like we give you a bad guy to blame for your problems and then like, oh, just give us control, bro. Like Metal Gear Solid 2 was very prescient in a lot of ways when it comes to like, issues of like censorship and how like the establishment controls people and just how like everyone is like complacent in this like giant conspiracy to to enable this like uh hellhole we live in, right? Like Metal Gear Solid 2 was very forward thinking in that regard, right? Nothing that Hollywood has ever produced has come close. Like maybe The Matrix like is the closest it's ever been. It's not as good as Metal Gear Solid 2. Let's be real here. Like Metal Gear Solid 2 with like within its like the three good games it did, historical fiction, which does more with like the setting than any Hollywood film ever produced. Metal Gear Solid 1, like, having this generic Hollywood plot with this like incredibly complex narrative that just builds up to like an amazing finish, it has two different endings, right? Depending on what you do. So like your actions do matter, right? It is possible for Meryl to die, right? Even though it's non-canon. Like uh there is like there are like real stakes in Metal Gear Solid. You feel so much more invested than you ever would in any film that it's not even funny, right? It is embarrassing how film cannot compete with games in any meaningful capacity, right? That they can't do anything. And people like Siskel, people like Ebert, well, especially Ebert, I don't know. Has Ebert did Siskel talk about games? I saw Ebert was like trash talking video games up until he dropped dead. Okay. Like this guy hated them. Like he's been complaining about video games since like a Ninja Turtles on NES. Like like, oh, this is too violent. Like, no, first of all, the movie was great. Fuck you, Ebert. And second of all, the game is great. Also, fuck you, Ebert. So like, okay, this guy, okay, not only is he like trash talking a legitimately good NES game, and it's probably like the root cause for like people like gaslighting themselves into thinking the game is bad by like the mid 2000s, right? Like, not only did he do that, he also tried trash talking the iconic movie. Okay, like, come on. Like, come on. You're not even a good film critic, Ebert. Like, come on. And you're expecting me to take you seriously when it comes to video game discussions? Are you serious? Like, did you ever play Metal Gear Solid? Did you ever play Shadow of the Colossus? Did you ever play, like, any of this good stuff that exists? Like, Little King Story, Pikmin. Like, there are so many games that have, like, artistic merit to them that this fat fuck would never ever like acknowledge, right? Because he doesn't play video games. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He doesn't have any like context as to what makes gaming great because he's not a gamer. So with that in mind, why exactly are we taking people like that seriously? Why exactly are we taking Hollywood's claims about gaming and its lack of artistic integrity seriously from why are we taking the opinions of people who don't play video games seriously? Like, why exactly should we care what these frauds have to say about Zelda, Mario, or Pokemon? Like, I don't. The only reason I'm talking about this at all is because of just about uh, how dedicated they were to like downplaying video games throughout their entire careers, right? Like right from like the very beginning of the NES days, right? Back when like the NES was exploding in America, right? Like, oh, these video games are evil. Like, no, like these games are better than anything you've seen, anything you've covered, anything you've ever done. Okay. Metal Gear Solid on its own is better than like essentially every action movie, right? Like it is a step beyond. It is far beyond anything that like the limited film medium could ever accomplish. And it is high time that Hollywood starts acknowledging that. Gaming is bigger and better than film ever was. And that movement, that reality is spearheaded entirely by these amazing Japanese developers that are innovative, that are creative, that put out some of the best things I've ever experienced ever, right? Video games are superior to movies, right? Full stop.